Hello, and welcome to News Now with Kevin Dietz. We're glad you stopped by. On tonight's show, we will have former Detroit FBI boss Andy Arena, who's going to talk about the death of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Was it an unauthorized assassination or a legal killing of a known terrorist? We'll get into that. And we'll talk with criminal defense attorney Neil Rockine, who's outraged that the Michigan State Police is not getting an independent agency to investigate the failure and possible fraud of MSP contractors in the calibration process of breathalyzer machines in the state of Michigan. And the impeachment trial of President Donald Trump is underway. Is it a waste of money and time or necessary to rein in the president? And how will it impact all of us in the 2020 election? But we begin tonight with new allegations against Michigan State Senator Peter Lucido, this time from another state senator, Mallory McEnroe, a Democrat from Royal Oak. The senator told Cranes, "He shook my hand with his other hand, held my low back with his fingers on my hips, effectively my upper rear, and we had back and forth conversation." She went on to say, quote, "He asked me who I beat, and I said, I beat Marty Nolenberg, at which point he looked me up and down, raised his eyebrows, and said, I can see why." Joining us now is political strategy analyst Rashini Rajkumar, who's also a lawyer and a media expert. Rashini, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Kevin, and congrats on the new show.
Thanks. So what do you think about what we're seeing here as it pertains to Pete Lucido?
Well, a couple different things. So first off, Senator Lucido, you know better, right? And in his initial response to just kind of saying he was misunderstood with the Michigan Advance reporter, and then he says he's misquoted. I mean, that's kind of a mess. And in this day and age, this is the kind of pickle you shouldn't let yourself get in. We've seen a lot of different scenarios where this exact kind of situation has not played out well, especially for male members of state and federal offices. Then back it up with Senator McMurrow's allegation and how she's saying this. It just doesn't look good for him. But the only sort of kind of fly in the ointment in the case against him would be the fact that she waited this long to bring this up. And maybe it was because she didn't think anyone would believe her. But my sense is this is not good, both legally and kind of the optics of this for Senator Pete Lucido.
So last week it was a Capitol reporter who said, why don't you stick around? I have some male students coming in and you could have some fun with them. How does that, he denied that, of course, and how does that change that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, if he did say it the way she's describing, it's pretty despicable. I mean, especially if it's an all-boys school and you're kind of trying to allude to this sexual connotation of that. So either way, he should know better. He's senior enough of a state senator and of a person to understand how right now, in our time, definitely the Me Too era and beyond, these are just stupid things to say.
So he denied both allegations. How important are other witnesses in this case? Possibly those other boy students who may have heard the conversation?
Yeah, they're very important. I mean, to the extent that the internal Michigan investigation that's going to happen or that's been called for by leaders from both sides here, it will be important how much they're going to believe young boys. I don't know. But if each of them individually is asked privately, without their other friends around, and if what they remember is more in alignment with what Allison Donahue claims, then Senator Lucido is really going to look bad. And it's going to go against him, and the voters will have their choice. I don't know that this is something that's going to remove you from office, but it's certainly something that is not good for his PR right now.
Let's talk impeachment hearings. President Donald Trump is so concerned about all of this that he left the country. He's off to Switzerland to try and bring in some more business here in the United States. What do you think about him just skipping town?
Yeah, well, first off, it's like a great time for Davos to be happening, right? It's a great time for him, his optics and his PR to say, look, it's business as usual. I'm running the country. I've got things that the head of state does. So he can definitely, he has a great out. There's no better out for someone than something like where he has to be for the country. And you know what? I wouldn't blame him. If he were my client, I'd say, hey, if this were on your calendar, go do it, because this trial is going to happen regardless. And until he gets called to possibly have to be on the stand, which is doubtful that he would be called. He doesn't really have to be present. He doesn't even have to be in the country because this will come to him and will be broadcast all over the world. If anything, it might be a little uncomfortable in his travels that this is happening back at home, but he has a great opportunity for diversion for being out of the country.
It seems to me people don't really care a lot about the impeachment trial. Republicans I talked to say it was rigged in the House, and the Democrats I talked to say it'll be rigged in the Senate. Is there any reason for all of us everyday citizens to watch this thing unfold every day?
I think there's a reason if you're a lover of the Constitution and a student of history. But I think unlike the Clinton impeachment in the House, unlike what might have been with Nixon, and then he resigned before those proceedings could even start, we aren't as glued to our TVs or our devices as we were in the past. And some of it is because politics has gotten even more political, in 2019 and 2020. So I think that's why we're not glued to it. It's pretty darn obvious that the parties are picking sides and they're not really giving themselves a lot of credibility in the eyes of the public when you have them quoted as saying different things, like McConnell working with the president, and then his Democratic colleagues are blasting McConnell for saying things like that. So, other than those of us who are in the media and love politics, and this is kind of what we do for a living, I don't know that the regular American is going to care to the extent that maybe they should and that they have in the past. And look, Kevin, this is only the third time something like this has happened. It is a very serious moment in time. Nothing takes away from that, but there are so many other options for people to occupy their time and the airwaves.
All right, Rashini, we'll be checking back in with you. Thanks so much for joining us. Now,
thanks, Kevin.
You bet. Now, let's see what the president said about this in his tweet. He said, heading to Davos, Switzerland to meet the world and business leaders and bring good policy and additional hundreds of billions of dollars back to the United States of America. We are now number one in the universe by far. Responses on Twitter, Jeff Tydrick tweets, dementia and delusion of grandeur are one heck of a cocktail. And RD tweets, I'm honored to have America represented by President Trump. He continues to do everything he said he would do, and I love it. We want to hear what you think, so give us a call at the phone number below and speak out, and we'll play your responses on the show. When we come back, we'll be talking to the former Detroit FBI boss, Andy Arena, about the death of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Was it an unauthorized assassination or a legal killing of a known terrorist? We'll be right back. President Donald Trump recounted minute-by-minute details of the U.S. strike that killed Iran's top military leader, General Qasem Soleimani, at a recent fundraiser. Trump described in detail as he watched and listened remotely to military officials who were airborne watching the strike from cameras on board. And he was told, sir, they have 1 minute to live. Sir, 30 seconds, 10, 9, 8. Then all of a sudden, boom. Joining us on News Now is Andy Arena, who is in charge of the Detroit FBI when a terrorist tried to blow up a plane above the skies of Detroit on Christmas Day with a bomb hidden in his underwear. His name was Farouk Abdullah Muttalib. He was arrested and interrogated for information. Qasem Soleimani was shot dead. Andy, thanks for being on the show.
Kevin, thank you.
So what do you make of the decision to take him out, and how much information might we have gotten if they were able to scoop him up and interrogate him as we did with the underwear bomber?
So I think General Soleimani is a little different, obviously, than the underwear bomber. He leads a designated terrorist organization, but at the end of the day, he's a general in a recognized army in a recognized country. So he holds a little bit different stature, I think, than a terrorist trying to ignite a bomb in his underwear here in Detroit. But it raises a lot of questions. It is the policy of the United States government, has been and always will be, probably. We do not assassinate foreign leaders. We do not assassinate other people. We do not target for killing leaders of other organizations.
So some call this an illegal assassination, and some are saying, no, this guy was a known terrorist, and you needed to take him out. So what's your take on it as with the information you have available?
So those are the rules of engagement. Those have been our rules, but obviously the world's changing, right? I mean, the threat is different. The way we fight wars is different. And I think it really comes down to two questions. Number one is who had the authority to grant the killing? And number two, do we kill? Do we launch an attack like this? So number one, if Congress declares war, right? The president has the authority to protect U.S. Interests in U.S. Troops overseas. But it falls upon Congress to declare war. So in a case like this, that's what you're basically doing. You are declaring war. You're fighting a war.
All right, but are we at war? Isn't there a war on terror that's going on and continuing? And if this is a terrorist, is that part of the war on terror, or do they have to declare a separate war against Iran?
So if you go back to the wake of 9/11, Congress passed the authorization for use of military force. It was very, very specific. It allowed the U.S. military to go into Afghanistan and around the world to fight al-Qaeda and the Taliban and those who launched the 9/11 attack. There was a second authorization of use military force that allowed U.S. forces to go into Iraq to take out Saddam Hussein. Congress gave the president the authority to do those things. I think this probably is a little bit beyond what Congress gave the president the authority to do.
So Democrats were upset, and they immediately moved for a war powers resolution trying to restrict the president. Was this something that could have been done before there was any attack, or was this something that they said, we don't like the way this attack happened, we need to do something? And do you agree with them doing it?
Well, I think it has little effect. It has little teeth to it, Kevin. But I think if you look at the authorization for use of military force from 2001, post 9/11, Congress has been debating that every day since that, right? Did Obama have the authority to do certain things? The Republicans said no, Democrats said yes. Shoes on the other foot now, right? I think Congress really needs to go back and look at that and make a reauthorization for the president to fight terrorism. There is a so-called war on terrorism, but has not been declared by Congress.
You know, but here's this thing. This guy gets off the plane and he gets in his Jeep, and they have limited time to decide whether to take out this guy. I mean, everyone I've talked to agrees this guy was a bad guy.
No question.
And so do you have to go and get congressional approval to take this shot when you have maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity?
Well, but I think this guy's a little bit different. We're not talking about Osama bin Laden. We're not talking about al-Baghdadi, right? This guy is a general in a recognized army. He's not a good guy. He's a bad guy. But I think there's a little bit more thought and a little bit more support for something like that.
If he were captured, do you think people would be saying you need to release this guy, or do you think they'd be saying you need to hold this guy and interrogate him for information?
So, Kevin, that would have been a whole other discussion, right? You look at the outrage with this. What do you think that would have been, right?
It would have been 10 times.
10 times worse. And so really what that would have taken was what we call a rendition, and which basically is a nice word for kidnapping, right? You're basically kidnapping the guy. Would have been world outcry over something like that.
And you think we might have had to release him then?
Oh, it would have been ugly.
All right. And what do you think, real quickly, what do you think about the Iranians shooting down that airliner? Is that an act of terrorism, or is that just a bad accident?
Well, if you look throughout history, we've seen a number of mistakes like this. It's a very, very bad mistake. I think it's indicative of the Iranians' ability to wage war. They like to rattle the saber. I don't think they have the technology or the ability that we certainly have. It's a huge mistake. Whether you deem it terrorism or not, it's a bad look and a bad act.
Thanks a lot for being on News Now. Hope to have you back soon.
Anytime, Kev.
Thanks, Andy Arena. Coming up, we talk with attorney Neil Rockine about the problems with the Michigan State Police and the problems they're having with their breathalyzer machines. People are outraged, and Neil Rockine says Michigan State Police should not be the agency investigating. We'll be right back. Welcome back to News Now. The Michigan State Police have a big problem. The people who are supposed to keep the breathalyzer machines that test suspected drunk drivers may have been fudging the numbers and the reports that are used to get convictions. A fraud investigation is underway that could lead to criminal charges. And 200 of the breathalyzer machines in question are being pulled to be tested. Police are being told to take suspected drunk drivers to the hospital to have their blood drawn, as the machines are currently unreliable. Here to get into this is criminal defense attorney Neil Rockine. It looks like we have some contractors who are supposed to test these breathalyzer machines not doing their job, or maybe even worse, maybe faking the numbers. What What do we know so far?
So what we know is that in Michigan, in order for a breath test to be admitted in court, somebody has to verify, a particular person has to verify and calibrate that machine every 120 days. The law is that if it's not calibrated every 120 days, then the machine has to be taken out of service and the test can't be admissible. So what we have is the people who have to literally come out and test it have to sign what is essentially an under oath declaration that they have tested and calibrated that machine and it's working. And there are serious questions and even allegations that the people who were supposed to do those calibrations lied, committed fraud, or misrepresented whether they did it or when they did it.
Who are these people that do this? How do you have any idea? I mean, if they're actually doing it, what do they do when they show up? Do they have them shipped to them? Do they go check them out? How do you know that? How would you know that they're doing? Who's checking on them?
Who's policing the contractors of the police? Well, according to the state police, the police. So essentially, each breathalyzer, which is in a particular police department, is located usually in a room, in a data master or breath test room. And these guys, and there were only 3 of them for this company that had I think it was like a $1.5 million contract with the state police. They divided the state into three sectors. And one person was responsible for the East Coast, one for the West Coast, and one for the North. And they're supposed to come in, and they're supposed to verify and actually go out to the local police department and check. So someone is supposed to see them walk in and walk out. But right now, all it is we have to take their word for it. And the problem is that their word is from what we've discovered, is not very good.
So what's new today in this is that you guys are saying the Michigan State Police should not be the agency investigating this. You want an independent investigation.
Yes. I don't think, and for reasons that are so obvious, they shouldn't have to be stated by you, I, or anybody else. But the idea that one agency can conduct its own investigation of its own people, I mean, the conflict of interest, it screams of conflict of interest. So I know, for example, that if I walk into and the importance of the testing, so that if I walk into a scale in my bathroom, and I want to know whether or not I've gained a pound or lost a pound, I have to rely on the accuracy of that scale. And in this case, we're dealing with things that are far more important than whether or not I've gained a pound or lost a pound. Whether someone is below, at, or above the legal limit is critical in an allegation of drunk driving. And the problem is that the Michigan State Police wants to tell us that they can police themselves. They want to say that they can look into this themselves. They'll police their own contractors. And the problem is that I don't know why we should have to accept, in fact, I'll say that we shouldn't have to accept any finding by the Michigan State Police when they're just investigating themselves. We always want an outside agency. There's never a circumstance in life where we allow one body to investigate itself and we say, oh, that's it. You're all done. It's good. We're happy. We want someone else outside to look at it. Special counsel, independent counsel. Heck, I'll do it. They can appoint Neil Rockine to investigate. They can appoint one-man grand juries. In the city of Flint, in other investigations, we've appointed people. We've had special prosecutors. We need somebody to come in and investigate this separately.
So I think they've said that they've identified already 50-some cases that are in question. What happens to those cases? Your phone must be ringing off the hook. I mean, do they got to throw those cases out? What do you do?
Okay, well, so first of all, let's take the first thing. That's nonsense. What we're dealing with is if there's a case in which one of those representatives, who's just a contractor, not a police officer, they're just a contractor, hired by this company, hired by the state police to go out and test these devices, if one time one of these guys made a false representation in documents in court, I would suggest that none of us are obligated to accept that any other representation they made is reliable. So the idea that, well, they lied on a couple occasions and we'll throw out those 20, 30, or 40 breath tests, but we'll accept all the rest, I think is nonsense. If they lied once, then we should be able to look at the reliability of their other declarations under oath. Why should we take their word for it now?
How does the law work? Would they have to go back and get new trials, or do you think, are you calling for a total dismissal of all cases since they've known about this problem?
I think those are both possibilities. Yes, our phone, the phones of my peers have been ringing off the hook. We've got people who want to have their cases reopened, re-examined. Not every case is going to be capable of being relooked at, but there are some cases that should be relooked at. And I'll tell you, prosecutors who knew or who were on notice, or even the state police who was on notice that there was a problem as far back as August of 2019, they ought to reopen all of their cases. They ought to allow defendants and defense lawyers the choice if we want to reopen those cases and re-examine them. We should not be left to accept their word or their solution. We should have our own just solution in court.
Should people be fired? Should people go to jail?
If they're found to have made misrepresentations that maybe ended up costing people convictions, license sanctions, and maybe even jail and the consequences of jail, then then they should be jailed themselves and they should be fired minimally.
All right. Will you come back and follow up on this as this continues?
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Neil Rocca, and we appreciate your time. We want you to be a part of this show, so we want you to call us at the number below and give us your take on all that's going on that we talked about today, and we'll be sharing your feedback on tomorrow's show. Thanks for tuning in to News Now with Kevin Dietz.